The year is 1204, the morning after one of the most bizarre battles of the early Middle Ages. The slopes of the steep Mount Nakhu Gun are strewn with tens of thousands of dead warriors. They lie in a continuous, unbroken carpet, covering the rocky ledges and deep crevices. What we are looking at is not some wild, undisciplined militia. This is the regular army of the Naiman Khanate, the wealthiest and most technologically advanced power in Central Asia. The fallen are clad in the finest steel armor of the era, forged by the master craftsmen of settled cities. However, as Mongolian looters search the bodies, they encounter a terrifying detail. The vast majority of these elite guardsmen were not killed by arrows. Their flesh was not pierced by heavy spears, nor were they hacked apart by sabers. The soldiers' rib cages are caved in, their skulls are split open, and their bones are shattered, as if a 100,000-strong army had simply collapsed in on itself. At the very peak of the mountain, amidst his mutilated personal guard, the victors find the corpse of the empire's ruler. Tayang Khan is dead. They strip him of his expensive silks and heavy armor, yet they do not find a single puncture wound. Not a drop of blood was spilled by a foreign weapon, but the monarch had stopped breathing. How did a massive, regular army with overwhelmingly superior weaponry end up completely annihilated in a single short night, almost without engaging in close-quarters combat? What kind of weapon did the future Genghis Khan deploy to force the army of a superpower to destroy itself on these mountain ledges? The history of the Mongol conquests often seems like a continuous, unstoppable march of a bloodthirsty horde over the corpses of weak neighbors. Just recall our previous episodes about the surgically precise operations of Generals Subutai and Jebe, who chased sultans onto uninhabited islands and ground megacities into dust, or the betrayal of Wang Khan of the Karaite and the deadly venomous intrigues of Jamukha against his own blood brother. But back then, in 1204, the Mongols were considered nothing more than ragged steppe upstarts. Standing against them were the Naimans, a people in whose capital palaces Nestorian Christian priests read the gospel, where bureaucrats meticulously maintained state records in the Uyghur script, and where rulers sealed their decrees with a state golden seal. The Naimans drank wine from silver goblets, wore silk brocade, and physically despised the nomads of the East for their utter poverty, lack of manners, and the ever-present stench of campfire smoke. There's more to this defeat than just military tactics. This is the story of how the sheer arrogance of Queen Gurbasu forced an invincible army to step right into the void. It is about why the ultimate schemer, Jamukha, while standing in the camp of his Naiman allies, would suddenly launch a campaign of psychological terror, driving a foreign monarch utterly insane right on the battlefield. And it is about how Genghis Khan, facing overwhelming enemy superiority with an army riding thoroughly exhausted horses, would create a massive optical illusion out of 1,000,000 campfires, paralyzing the enemy's mind before a single sword was swung. Today, we are going to break down the real reason behind the demise of Tayang Khan on an unreachable mountain peak. You won't hear the clashing of blades or see shields being pierced here. This is the anatomy of the rapid collapse of a superpower, an elite that believed a little too much in its own civilizational exceptionalism. When a well-fed, complacent empire collides with a hungry, fiercely motivated, and highly disciplined force, expensive steel armor merely turns into a very heavy coffin. Tayang Khan once arrogantly threw out the phrase that there can be no two masters on earth. The ruler turned out to be absolutely right. It's just that the outcome of this clash completely rewrote the history of all of Asia, gifting the Mongols not just vast new pastures, but the very essence of statehood itself, ripped straight from the hands of the losers. In an era where sheer blinding panic kills soldiers much more reliably than a well-aimed arrow, the only one who survives is the one who controls that fear. Presenting the fourth episode of our series, Tayang Khan, the collapse of an arrogant superpower. The late 12th century. To truly appreciate the scale of the impending catastrophe, you have to understand the sheer height of the Naiman pedestal. Right in the very heart of Central Asia sprawled an empire that completely shattered all existing preconceptions about the nomadic steppe world. The Naiman Khanate stretched across vast, sprawling territories, greatly surpassing the Holy Roman Empire in total land area. They didn't just aimlessly wander from pasture to pasture here. The nomads of the West had built a highly paradoxical synthesis of civilizations. Bustling trade took place right inside their royal camps. Educated Uyghur officials diligently maintained a complex state bureaucracy, and imperial decrees were officially authenticated with a solid gold seal. The local aristocracy wore luxurious Chinese silks, drank fine wine from ornate silver goblets, and prayed according to the Nestorian Christian rite. Compared to their eastern neighbors, who wrapped themselves in stiff, untreated animal hides, the Naiman commanders, clad in heavy steel armor, looked like alien time travelers from the distant future. This entire formidable state machine was forged by Inansha Bilge Khan, the supreme ruler of the West. This mighty monarch held his neighbors in absolute iron-fisted submission and forced even the heavily armed border garrisons of the Chinese Jin dynasty to reckon with his overwhelming power. The old sovereign dreamed of leaving his heirs a massive, monolithic power, fully capable of dictating its will to the entire continent. But after his death, his sons Tayang and Buiruk didn't end up dividing the military or the trade tariffs. Instead, the heirs of this great empire tore at each other's throats over their late father's beautiful young concubine. Sigh! This blinding passion literally ripped the state in two. Buiruk led his thousands of troops away into the rugged mountains, while Tayang remained to rule over the sweeping plains. The burning desire to possess a single woman outweighed their most basic instinct for survival. The mighty monolith had shown its very first crack. Remaining in the capital, Tayang Khan technically maintained his formal grip on power. Tens of thousands of heavily armed cavalrymen marched in strict formation around his royal cap. However, that luxurious golden tent concealed an utter political vacuum. Tayang actively avoided making any complex decisions, vastly preferring the thrill of falconry to the tedious boredom of state councils. The real reins of power were swiftly seized by the Khan's mother, Queen Gorbesu. She personally controlled all diplomacy, managed the vast treasury, and appointed the highest-ranking generals. She was the one who dictated the absolute will to the royal court, while her son amused himself with his hunting trips. Battle-hardened, armor-clad commanders submissively bowed their heads before an aging widow. The year 1204 arrives. Alarming news begins echoing from the east. Fiercely divided and scattered tribes have suddenly united under the iron rule of a man named Temujin, a man who, just yesterday, was widely considered a miserable steppe outcast, had systematically annihilated the powerful Karaite Confederation, and is now aggressively pivoting his victorious troops towards the west. An emergency council of war is frantically assembled at Tayang Khan's main headquarters. After listening to the dire reports about the rapid advance of this new force, the monarch delivers a phrase that is forever etched into the historical chronicles. They say some pathetic, insignificant Mongols have appeared in the east. There cannot be two suns in the sky, and there cannot be two masters on the earth. Tayang Khan decrees that a massive preemptive strike must be launched. The ruler was completely confident. His gleaming, steel-clad cavalry would effortlessly trample these disorganized savages into the dirt. But the most devastatingly arrogant assessment of the approaching enemy comes directly from Queen Gorbesu. Hearing the desperate reports of the advance patrols, she simply wrinkles her nose in sheer disgust. "The Mongols are unsightly to look at," the ruler's mother declares to the entire court. "Their clothes are pitch black, and they emit an unbearable foul stench. I suppose their hags are only fit to milk our cows, and even then, only if we force them to wash their filthy hands." The Naimans genuinely believed that their advanced written language and heavy steel armor provided an absolute ironclad guarantee of invulnerability. The elite was utterly convinced that they were fighting a bunch of unwashed vagabonds who could be scattered to the winds with a single blow. But the terrifying reality was that a massive army, forged with absolute iron discipline and having just obliterated all rival factions, was marching straight at them. By judging their enemy solely by the smell of their clothes, the royal court had completely lost its most crucial survival instinct: primal animal caution. The blinding arrogance of Queen Gorbesu effectively disarmed the entire state. Instead of ordering a total nationwide mobilization, the Naiman generals carelessly planned a light, breezy, punitive expedition. Tayang Khan finally springs into action. However, despite his incredibly loud words about two suns in the sky, the ruler has absolutely no desire to dirty his hands in a brutal head-on collision. He devises a highly complex political maneuver. Secret ambassadors gallop furiously towards the borders of China, directly into the lands of the Ongud tribe, who heavily guarded the Great Wall. The grand design looks completely flawless on paper. Catch Temujin in a gigantic pincer movement, striking him simultaneously from the west and the south. The trap is rapidly closing. The Naimans were completely confident that their battle plan was perfect, but this brilliant strategy had one utterly fatal flaw. Temujin would receive detailed information about every single step the enemy took before the Naiman generals even managed to saddle their horses. The spring of 1204. Tayang Khan, completely certain of his overwhelming superiority, is meticulously preparing a massive strike. The monarch plans to trap Temujin's forces in a gigantic pincer movement. He specifically dispatches an envoy named Torbidata far to the southeast, right to the borders of the mighty Jin Empire. There, right alongside the Great Wall of China, roam the Onguds under the firm rule of Alakush Digit Kuri. The Naiman master plan is extremely simple. The Onguds strike hard from the south, while Tayang Khan's elite heavy cavalry smashes in from the west. But a massive vulnerability suddenly emerges in this calculation. Alakush Digit Kuri was a ruthless pragmatist. After carefully weighing the extreme arrogance of the Naimans against the unbreakable steel discipline of Temujin, the Ongud chief makes his final choice. He flatly rejects Tayang Khan's ambassador and instantly dispatches a secret messenger, Yukunan, directly to the Mongol headquarters. The entire master plan of the enemy falls right into the waiting hands of Genghis Khan. The messenger catches up with the Mongols in the Temien-Kiev steppe during a massive Bachu hunt at the Tulkin-Cheod tract. Temujin receives incredibly exhaustive intelligence. He now knows absolutely everything about the enemy. However, nature dictates its own harsh terms, turning this massive strategic advantage into a cruel joke. It is early spring outside, the most terrifying and devastating season for any nomadic army. The brutal winter has completely drained all the life out of the animals. The Mongolian war horses are utterly exhausted to their very limits, having turned into little more than walking skeletons covered in skin. Hardened veterans, men who have survived dozens of bloody battles, look at their gaunt steeds in utter despair. At the military council, the generals propose the most logical way out: retreat. Wait patiently until the horses fatten up on the fresh spring grass, and only then accept the battle. Going on the offensive right now means recklessly throwing their entire army directly under the heavy hooves of the steel-clad Naiman cavalry. Panic begins to severely infect the command staff. Then, Belgute takes the floor, the Khan's own half-brother. This is the exact same Belgute whose shoulder was once cleaved open at a feast, and who back then had desperately pleaded for peace. But now, he aggressively demands war. His fiery speech, forever recorded in the ancient chronicles, completely shatters the defeatist mood. What use is life if the enemy takes your quiver while you are still breathing? The Khan's brother fiercely declares that it is far better for a true warrior to leave his bones right next to his bow than to quietly endure the arrogant, insulting speeches of the enemy. Belgute sharply reminds them that while the Naimans loudly boast about their massive numbers, their supply trains are incredibly heavy and slow. If we strike them suddenly, they will flee straight into the high mountains. To horse! His uncompromising stance is strongly supported by their brother Temujin, who passionately urges them not to use their skinny, starving horses as a weak excuse. Temujin abruptly cancels the hunt. He makes a bold decision that flies in the face of all conventional logic. An entire army mounted on utterly exhausted horses, literally staggering from sheer weakness, begins a rapid march to face the most heavily equipped and numerically massive superpower on the entire continent. The armies rapidly close the distance. Soon, the forward Naiman patrols stumble upon a Mongol reconnaissance unit near the source of the Khan River. In a brief, chaotic skirmish, they capture a single trophy: a pathetic, piebald, half-starved little horse with a decaying, rotten saddle. The Naimans become absolutely convinced that they are facing a pitiful rabble that won't last a single hour in combat. They will completely relax their guard, blissfully unaware that their minds have already stepped directly into a deadly trap. Temujin is about to turn this arrogant laughter and his very own crippling weakness into the absolute perfect weapon. Waiting ahead for the enemy was a grand illusion that would completely strip the Naiman ruler of his sanity before the very first sword was even swung. The summer of 1204. The Sari-Kir Valley. The great steppe completely freezes in anticipation of the decisive battle that will dictate the fate of all of Asia. But it does not kick off with the fierce clashing of swords. It begins with hollow, incredibly condescending laughter. Ha 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 ha! The forward Naiman patrols are actively combing the terrain near the very source of the Khan River. Stumbling upon the Mongol watch, they engage in a very brief skirmish. Temujin's men quickly retreat, deliberately abandoning a trophy behind: a miserable, piebald little horse fitted with a decrepit, dried-out saddle. This pathetic horse is ceremoniously paraded right into Tayang Khan's royal headquarters. The entire spectacle triggers explosive bursts of completely genuine hilarity among the Naiman elite. The animal is starved to its absolute limits, its dry skin tightly stretched over sharply protruding ribs. The steel-clad generals of the mighty superpower stare down at this walking skeleton and draw the only conclusion that makes sense to them. The enemy's army is entirely incapable of fighting. Indisarida. The elite is utterly convinced that the enemy has been broken by the brutal winter and severe starvation. This is the classic, fatal blindness of a well-fed empire. The Naimans are busy evaluating combat potential based solely on the flashy gloss of enemy equipment, failing completely to grasp the most brutal law of the steppe. In the harsh wild, it's not the most beautiful who survives, but the most deeply resilient. The royal court completely relaxes, eagerly anticipating a casual, effortless military stroll. At that exact same moment, back in the Sari-Kir tract, the Mongols are indeed weathering a devastatingly severe crisis. Their horses are thoroughly exhausted by the brutal march, and the men are dead tired. At the military council, the commander, Dodai Cherby, steps up to speak, fully realizing that a direct, head-on collision with the vastly superior numbers of fresh Naiman cavalry would result in an absolute massacre. He proposes an incredibly risky tactical maneuver. The seasoned commander urgently convinces Temujin not to cluster his troops together in a tight defensive camp, but to do the exact opposite, to scatter them across the entire expanse of the valley as widely as humanly possible, specifically to give their exhausted horses the desperately needed room to graze. But the ultimate weapon in Dodai Cherby's grand plan is not fresh green grass, but a massive optical illusion. Genghis Khan issues an order that completely violates every known rule of military camouflage. As darkness finally falls, every single Mongolian warrior, not every squad of 10, but absolutely every single living soul in the entire camp, is strictly ordered to light 5 separate campfires. The sun sets. Short pause. The Naiman scouts carefully climb to the mountain peaks to accurately assess the true scale of the enemy encampment. They gaze down into the sprawling valley, and the terrifying scene that unfolds before them permanently shatters their psyches. The darkness below has transformed into a violently pulsing, absolutely endless sea of fire. A deeply panicked report furiously flies straight to Tayang Khan's headquarters, a message forever preserved in the chronicles. "They have more fires than there are stars in the sky!" Inside the golden tent of the Naiman king, the arrogant laughter is instantly silenced. Short pause. The miserable, piebald little horse is completely forgotten. Short pause. A painfully simple trick involving nothing more than dry brushwood and fire manages in a single night to transform Temujin's exhausted army into a terrifying, fundamentally incalculable horde. Tayang Khan, who just that morning had been casually planning to crush the enemy with a single sweeping blow, completely freezes in a state of absolute, paralyzed stupor. Gripped by a primal, animalistic terror, the monarch makes a tactically sound but politically suicidal decision. He strictly orders his thousands of troops not to engage in direct combat, but to fully retreat behind the Altai Mountains. His tactical logic is clear. The Naiman horses are well fed. They will easily outpace any pursuit, dragging the Mongols deep into the harsh mountains, where they will finally lose all their remaining strength. But the deeply wounded pride of the heir to the throne violently interferes with this seemingly perfect plan. Tayang Khan's son, Prince Kuchlug, upon learning of the cowardly order to retreat, publicly humiliates the commander-in-chief. He sends a scathing message directly to his father, outright calling him a coward. Kuchlug declares that old woman Tayang is too terrified to even step out of his yurt to relieve himself, and brutally compares his own flesh and blood father to a weak, sickly calf. To swallow such a devastating insult from his own son right in front of all his senior generals would mean losing his absolute power forever. The old, battle-hardened Naiman commander, Kuksay Sabrak, flies into a violent, blind rage at the sheer stupidity of the young prince. He furiously slaps his quiver and screams in utter despair at Tayang Khan. "Why are you losing your head? Can't you see that the hour of fortunate destiny has struck for the Mongols? Ah, you truly worthless man!" But the unstoppable mechanism of complete catastrophe has already been triggered. Broken by the vicious mockery of his heir and completely blinded by his absolute terror of 1,000,000 campfires, Tayang Khan issues the fatal order. He sharply turns his gigantic army around and leads it directly towards the waiting Mongols. At the top of the mountain pass, near the jagged rocky ledges of Mount Nakhu Gun, the two massive armies inevitably converge and take up their final positions right near the jagged rocky ledges of Mount Nakhu Gun. The grand, ultimate battle for total control over the Great Steppe finally begins. The Naiman monarch, possessing an elite force of heavy cavalry, will never actually give the final order to attack. And the carefully chosen words of just one single man within his very own entourage will force his enormous army to literally hurl itself directly into an abyss in the pitch-black darkness. The summer of 1204. The foot of Mount Nakhu Gun. The two armies are utterly frozen in place, staring each other down. Genghis Khan looks up at the steep slopes, thickly dotted with the heavy Naiman cavalry. The enemy vastly surpasses him in sheer numbers, the freshness of their war horses, and the unparalleled quality of their heavy steel armor. A direct, head-on assault rushing from the bottom straight up a steep incline against such a formidable armada means absolute, certain death. Genghis Khan issues a brilliant command that has forever entered the annals of military science. He divides the complex offensive into 3 distinct phases. The warriors are strictly ordered to march like katagana bushes, to deploy into a lake formation, and finally to strike like a driving chisel. The cavalry initiates its advance in a sparse, widely scattered formation, looking exactly like the scattered bushes of steppe katagana. This ingenious maneuver effectively concealed the true numbers of the attacking force and completely deprived the elite Naiman archers of the opportunity to strike at a densely packed target. As they close in on the enemy's fortified positions, the fast-moving units spread out into a massive, wide semicircle, a lake, rapidly enveloping the enemy's exposed flanks. And right in the very center, a highly dense, concentrated shock wedge quickly forms, the driving chisel. At the very tip of this piercing wedge rode the absolute vanguard, the legendary 4 dogs of war: Jebe, Subutai, Jelme, and Kublai. They violently smashed directly into the Naiman forward patrols with terrifying primal fury. The steppe chroniclers will record this exact scene with chilling, brutal directness. The Mongol vanguard violently chased the enemy patrols straight up the steep mountain slope, just like a starving wolf brutally drives a terrified flock of sheep right into their pen. From the very peak of the high mountain, Tayang Khan watches the absolute slaughter unfold. He holds the distinct advantage of gravity, massive sheer weight, and tens of thousands of heavily armed cavalrymen. But standing right next to him is none other than Jamukha, the incredibly brilliant schemer and former blood brother of Genghis Khan, whose long, twisted path from a sacred blood alliance to deadly venomous enmity we explored in deep detail in the episode Shadow of the Emperor. Seeing the ferocious attackers rapidly advancing, the Naiman sovereign anxiously asks Jamukha exactly who these terrifying people are. Jamukha suddenly has a golden opportunity to properly organize the defense of his powerful ally, but he has already realized the dark truth. The arrogant Naimans are completely doomed. So instead of offering any sound tactical advice, Jamukha immediately begins a cold, calculated psychological demolition of another man's fragile mind. He actively describes the advancing generals not as normal human beings. Jamukha wildly declares that Temujin has slipped the heavy iron chains off terrifying monsters with impenetrable copper foreheads and snouts exactly like driving chisels. He completely convinces Tayang Khan that these horrific demons feed exclusively on human flesh and are already loudly gulping their saliva in feverish anticipation of fresh blood. Every single venomous word from Jamukha strikes much truer than any physical arrow. Having successfully completed his campaign of verbal terror, he simply turns around and leads his own people straight off the battlefield, coldly leaving his supposed allies to be utterly torn apart. Deeply poisoned by these dark whispers and entirely broken by the terrifying nocturnal illusion of the campfires, Tayang Khan commits the ultimate, fatal mistake. Instead of barking a firm order to instantly counterattack, he frantically screams at his elite legions to retreat, higher up the steep slope, further away from the ravenous monsters. The grizzled old veteran Kokse Sabrak stares at this suicidal command in mute, absolute horror. He completely understands the grim reality. Heavy cavalry, totally deprived of its crucial forward momentum and brutally forced to backpedal up treacherous steep ledges, is utterly doomed. The general desperately tries to salvage the rapidly collapsing situation, organizing a fierce counterattack using only his own personal units, but the crucial initiative has been irretrievably lost. The mighty Naiman formation violently breaks down from the inside out. The Mongols operate with a chilling, purely mathematical cruelty. Their massive pincers relentlessly squeeze shut, surgically severing the entire right and left wings of the sprawling Naiman army directly from its center. Tayang Khan's elite riders, encased entirely in heavy iron, are completely stripped of any viable space to maneuver. They are forcibly, violently squeezed upward toward the peak. By late evening, the 100,000-strong army of the once mighty superpower finds itself tightly, inescapably locked onto the incredibly narrow, treacherous, abyss-riddled rocky peak of Mount Nakhu Gun. The deadly trap has decisively slammed shut. An unimaginably massive crush of horses, heavy supply carts, and heavily armored men is violently compacted onto a tiny, confined patch of stone where it is physically impossible to even turn around. The sun officially sets. Genghis Khan issues a highly paradoxical command. There will be absolutely no final glorious assault. There will be absolutely no chaotic night attacks. The Mongols simply encircled the very base of the mountain in a tight, glowing ring of burning campfires and freeze silently in the darkness, completely cutting off any possible avenues of escape. The Mongolian ruler knew exactly what he was doing. He had absolutely no need to spill the precious blood of his own warriors on those treacherous rocks. Trapped in that tightly confined, elevated space, gravity itself would slaughter the enemy army far more reliably than any forged steel ever could. Deep night descends on the jagged rocks of Mount Nakhu Gun. Genghis Khan issues an order that completely shatters the traditional accepted logic of warfare. The highly mobile Mongolian cavalry makes absolutely no attempt to storm the sheer vertical slopes. The warriors simply close the tight ring around the base of the mountain and calmly light their roaring campfires. the fatal trap is locked. The arrogant Naimans had retreated to the very summit, foolishly believing that the sheer height and their impenetrable heavy armor would provide them with a completely invulnerable position for defense. The generals confidently expected to wait out the long night, seamlessly regroup at first light, and absolutely crush the frail nomads with their overwhelming mass. But tens of thousands of heavily armed cavalrymen, bulky supply carts, and hundreds upon hundreds of panicked horses found themselves violently compressed onto a tiny, incredibly narrow rocky plateau, crisscrossed by terrifyingly deep gorges. The single most heavily equipped army in all of Asia was not utterly destroyed by hostile enemy sabers, but rather by its own immense crushing weight and the merciless pull of gravity. Pitch-black darkness completely envelops the peak. There is absolutely no unified command left in the chaotic Naiman camp. Tayang Khan is thoroughly broken by his own blinding terror and fails to issue any clear, coherent orders. All around them is nothing but the howling, freezing wind and the glowing, inescapable ring of Mongolian campfires far below. The fraying nerves of the terrified soldiers are stretched to their absolute breaking point. In such an impossibly tight crush of bodies, all it takes is one single loud noise or one suddenly stumbling horse to instantly trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Without even waiting for the dawn, several panicked units desperately try to break through the tight cordon and begin a rapid descent. A massive, entirely chaotic movement suddenly erupts. Cavalrymen completely encased in heavy steel helplessly slip and slide on the treacherous rocky ledges. Massive, heavy war horses violently plunge into the dark abyss, dragging dozens of screaming men down right along with them. Completely blinded by sheer panic, the Grand Army brutally annihilates itself. Men violently trample one another in a frantic, desperate attempt to claw their way out of the suffocating crush. Shrieking, terrified horses relentlessly smash the fragile skulls of anyone who falls. The secret history of the Mongols accurately documents this horrific nocturnal catastrophe without any embellishment whatsoever. Tumbling from the great heights, they crushed and impaled one another to death. Hair flew wildly into the air, and bones snapped with such a terrifyingly loud crack that it sounded exactly as if someone were violently snapping dry branches. There was absolutely no heroic clashing of crossing swords, just the agonizing screams of human beings being crushed alive. The dawn of 1204 reveals a truly horrific, nightmarish scene. The Mongolian detachments slowly and methodically ascend the blood-stained slope, meeting absolutely no organized resistance. The cold ground is covered with a continuous, unbroken carpet of twisted, mangled iron, dead horses, and brutally torn bodies. The elite soldiers had completely destroyed themselves. Amidst this grotesque, bloody mess, at the very peak of the high mountain, the victors finally locate the ruler of the massive empire. Tayang Khan is dead. A close examination of his body puts a definitive end to the main mystery of this entire battle. There are no puncture wounds on the ruler from any Mongolian arrows or heavy spears. The supreme sovereign, who had so proudly declared that there cannot be two masters on this earth, perished miserably from utter exhaustion and massive blunt force trauma, brutally crushed beneath the heavy boots of his very own fiercely panicking army. The state of the Naimans completely collapsed in a single, incredibly bloody day. A proud, mighty power that possessed the most advanced technologies and immense wealth simply vanished from the political map forever. The victors slowly descend back into the valley, dragging the pitiful remnants of the survivors behind them. Genghis Khan sits quietly in his tent, calmly awaiting the spoils of his ultimate victory. They bring two very specific captives before him. The first turns out to be a woman who just a short time ago was turning her nose up in deep disgust at the Mongol stench. The second is a quiet man who has never held a sharpened sword in his entire life. Deeply hidden in the folds of his clothes is a heavy piece of solid gold, wholly capable of governing vast nations far more effectively than any military legion ever could. This single captive will hand the illiterate nomads their absolute most powerful weapon of statecraft. The year 1204. The sprawling valley at the very foot of Mount Nakhu Gun. The brutal battle is finally over. The once great army of the mighty Naimans has completely ceased to exist. The victors violently herd the terrified survivors into gigantic crowds, casually dividing the prisoners and the livestock. Two very specific people are brought right into Genghis Khan's royal headquarters. Two figures who perfectly embody the true, lasting outcome of this devastating war. First to stand before the Mongol leader is a woman clad in deeply torn but still incredibly luxurious silk garments. This is Queen Gurbesu, the mother of the late Tayang Khan and the true shadowy ruler of the collapsed superpower. The very same haughty aristocrat who, not so long ago, had disdainfully declared that the Mongols emitted an unbearable stench and that their wretched women were only fit to be lowly cow milkers. Now she stands utterly defeated in the dirt before the very man she considered a filthy, unwashed savage. Genghis Khan does not issue an order for her execution. He stares directly at her and utters a phrase that is forever fixed in the historical chronicles. "Was it not you who said that the Mongols smell foul? Why then have you come here now?" A quick death would have been a massive relief for the fallen queen. But the harsh laws of the steppe are incredibly cruel to the ultimate losers. Genghis Khan completely annihilates her fragile pride in the most utterly pragmatic way possible. He takes the aging ruler as his own personal concubine. This is a highly calculated political act of total, absolute absorption. The proud mistress of a truly great civilization is transformed into just another war trophy inside a nomad's yurt. The old world is completely broken, both physically and morally. But the second captive turns out to be immensely more valuable. The Mongolian warriors forcefully bring a very strange man before the Khan. He wears absolutely no armor and has never even held a sword in his soft hands. During a thorough search, they find a heavy piece of solid gold hidden in his robes, covered in incomprehensible, strange symbols. The captive's name is Tatar Tunga. He is a highly educated Uyghur scribe and the official keeper of the state seal for the Naiman Khanate. Genghis Khan, who knows absolutely neither how to read nor write, aggressively demands a full explanation of this object's true purpose. Tatar Tunga respectfully replies that without the exact impression of this very seal, not a single state decree, not a single tax collection, and not a single official appointment in the entire Naiman Empire carried any legal weight. A mere ingot of carved gold essentially replaced an army of thousands, forcing people to unconditionally obey across truly enormous distances. In that exact brilliant moment, the illiterate steppe chieftain suddenly realizes a profound, fundamental truth. You can absolutely conquer the world with sharp weapons, but you can only hold on to it with the immense power of papers and seals. Genghis Khan does not kill the stranger. He commands Tatar Tunga to remain permanently at his royal headquarters. the educated Uyghur official is entrusted with a truly unprecedented task: to completely adapt his native alphabet for the Mongolian language and to immediately begin teaching the sons of the Khagan how to read and write. It is precisely this captured scribe who will firmly lay the bedrock foundations of that very state machine, the one that will much later allow the brilliant General Subutai and the lightning-fast Jebe to perfectly coordinate entire armies across distances of thousands of kilometers, and empower brilliant imperial administrators to effectively govern millions of citizens across entirely conquered empires. The massive Naiman Khanate had completely perished. The mighty, sprawling power vanished forever, due to the paralyzing fear of its weak ruler and the blinding arrogance of its elite. Tayang Khan became the ultimate victim of his very own foolish illusion of total superiority. The absolute destruction of the Naimans triggered a massive civilizational paradigm shift for the Mongols. Having violently stripped statehood, the seal, and writing directly from the defeated, the wild, untamed steppe rapidly began to transform into a highly organized empire. The chaotic era of fractured, scattered tribes had definitively ended. The great steppe was finally united under the absolute iron rule of a single man. It genuinely seemed that the old, haughty aristocracy had been completely and utterly annihilated. But one single man managed to tear his way out of the deadly trap on Mount Nakhu Gun. The son of Tayang Khan, Prince Kuchlug, the very same arrogant heir whose vicious mockery had violently pushed his own father to a completely certain death. Completely stripped of his massive homeland, he absolutely refuses to surrender. In our next exciting episode, we will tell you exactly how this desperate fugitive manages to find safe refuge deep inside the Karakitai Empire, viciously betrays his own saviors, and violently seizes a completely foreign throne. We will see firsthand how blinding religious fanaticism warps him into a brutal tyrant, and how the relentless hunt for his severed head forces General Jebe to deploy the absolute ultimate weapon of information warfare. Coming up next is the wild, unbelievable true story of Kuchlug, the fugitive usurper who simply refused to die. Make sure to subscribe so you absolutely don't miss it. See you next time.